is very, very short. Our next speaker is Dr. Sura Rath. I can tell you all kinds of things about him. I'm just going to make this short. He's a professor of English. He used to teach here at LSU Shreveport. He was the chairman of our English department. And while he was doing that, he found time to start our India Studies program. And because of this, I think he's part political science type 2. He somehow or another got me to go to India for a political science conference. And he didn't have a hard time doing it, really. And this December, I think it's going to be my 13th time to India, and he's the person responsible for this. His dad knew Gandhi, and Gandhi told his dad to start a school in eastern India, and he took me to that school and took me to every temple and every school in that area. What year was that? Do you remember?
A long time.
Long time ago. And because of that, our Lincoln program, I need to back up just a little bit. Our International Lincoln Center began with the Washington semester, and that began in 1981. And for you people who know anything about Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. did not become an international city of any kind until the early 1980s, partly because of the bicentennial of the U.S. in 1976, and in the Kennedy Center, and then today it is an international city. And because of that, our program became international, and it's largely responsible for what we have done in India. And I'll add another portion of this on Saturday, but a good portion of it is due to Sura Rath. And Sura Rath, being an English professor, is going to tell us the linkage between Walt Whitman, Abraham Lincoln, and international stuff. Dr.
Okay,
Rath.
thank you. Thank you, Bill. I come here almost after 15 years. After 18 years of working here, I moved to Washington State, not because I didn't like Shreveport, but because I wanted to see other parts of America. And spent 10 years in Washington State and came back to Dallas. I work at the University of North Texas, Dallas campus now. And so when Bill asked me about this conference, I quickly accepted it for the chance to come back to Shreveport before he changed his mind. But I didn't know where exactly I fit in Lincoln studies. And it was he who suggested maybe you can connect him with one of your writers. And the writer that came to mind was Walt Whitman, one of the poets I admire a lot. So I took the title of my paper from a poem by William Wordsworth, Intimations of Immortality. I called it Whispers of Immortality, Walt Whitman's Lilac, as a key to Abraham Lincoln's appeal beyond the silent seas. And it's going to be a short paper, so I'm going to finish in about 20 minutes, I hope so. Historically, Abraham Lincoln's position as a leader among American presidents in the continental United States rests on two accomplishments: Union victory over the South in the Civil War that consolidated the nation, and the Emancipation Proclamation that brought an end to the long and dark institution of slavery. Though tinged with contradiction and paradox, this reputation has stood the test of time. More than 150 years after his assassination, he receives the same accolade as a national leader as he did when he was alive. Griffin notes in a recent New York Times essay, the train that brought Abraham Lincoln's body back to Springfield, Illinois, took almost 2 weeks to complete its journey, making a long northeasterly loop through Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, and Indiana. The last stretch from Chicago to Springfield was completed on the morning of May 3rd, 1865. Historian Barry Schwartz notes that in 1865 one could observe the strange phenomenon of Americans in a northern state deeply mourning Lincoln, even though the president was not especially popular or beloved at the time. In 1981, in his first presidential inaugural address, Ronald Reagan said that, quote, whoever would understand in his heart the meaning of America will find it in the life of Abraham Lincoln. In July 2018, just a few months back, a national poll ranking public opinion of American presidents had Lincoln at number 1. From Griffin's perspective, the divided response to Lincoln contradicts some modern assumptions about heroic leaders, but is central to Whitman's view of Lincoln as a hero. Not because he led the Union to victory or because of the Emancipation Proclamation, but because his death involved the ultimate gift to the people in a mythic economy of sacrifice and power. The grand deaths, as Whitman calls them, are a nation's most important inheritance. Lincoln's reputation as a world leader, similarly, is fractured into political and spiritual history. People unaffected by American national experience of slavery and violence, memory of sacrifice still place him at the highest position, suggesting Lincoln's universal appeal beyond the national borders. In fact, when Bill came to India for the first time, I took him to a small village elementary school where the children knew about Lincoln. Strangely, there was no table, there was no chair for the kids. They had no shoes, but they remembered Lincoln. They talked about Lincoln. Suggesting that Lincoln's universal appeal beyond the national borders, I examined this global appeal through Walt Whitman's 2 elegies. Actually, I do 1 for the purpose of time. When lilacs last and the doria bloomed, in which the poet meditates on national identity and sees Lincoln's assassination as, quote, a requirement of history for the new nation to go through a social and spiritual self-exploration. More than American social or political crisis, the spiritual purgation of a suffering nation provides the key to the president's worldwide glory. Lincoln scholars have pointed to the president's funeral journey and the elegiac narrative pace of lilac. Though opinions do not always agree. Kathy Rugoff, for instance, notes that the unnamed speaker in the poem expresses his sorrow over the death of him I love, and reveals his growing consciousness of his own sense of the meaning of death, and the consolation he paradoxically finds in death itself. The narrative action depicts the journey of Lincoln's coffin without mentioning the president by name, and portrays visions of the slain soldiers of war without mentioning either the Civil War or its causes. But she holds, that's Rugoff holds, that the identifications are assumed to be superfluous, even tactless. No American could fail to understand what war was meant. Finally, in the Carol of the Bird, the speaker recounts the song in which death is invoked, personified, and celebrated. Harold Bloom notes that elegies often have been used for political purposes as a means of healing a nation, as pastoral elegy uses rural imagery to address the poet's grief, a poet's response to death, that seeks to transmute the fact of death into an imaginatively acceptable form, to reaffirm what death has called into question, the integrity of the pastoral image of contentment. An elegy seeks also to attempt to preserve the meaning of an individual's life as something of positive value when that life itself has ceased. A typical pastoral elegy contains several features, including a procession of mourners, the decoration of a hearse or grave, a list of flowers, the changing of the seasons, and the association of the dead person with a star or other permanent natural object. This includes a discussion of the death, expressions of mourning, grief, anger, consolation, and the poet's simultaneous acceptance of death's inevitability and hope for immortality. R.W. French observes that while the association of President Lincoln's is the occasion of when lilacs last in the Dorian bloomed, the subject in the manner of elegy is both other and broader than its occasion. Lilacs turns out to be not just about one death, the death of Abraham Lincoln, but about death itself in abstraction and its place in the hierarchy of human experience. In section 7, just after the poet has placed a sprig of lilac on the coffin, the poem makes a pointed transition, not for you, for one alone. The poet chants, blossoms and branches green to coffins all I bring. Significantly, Lincoln is never mentioned by name in lilacs, nor does the poem relate to circumstances of his death. Indeed, the absence of the historical Lincoln in the poem is one of its most striking features. Historical considerations give way to universal significance. The fact of assassination, for example, is not mentioned. For while all people die, assassination is the fate of only a select few. Lilacs is a poem of 206 lines, divided into 16 sections. A free verse composition with echoes of classical elegy poetry and cadence of biblical prophecy. It juxtaposes images of the American landscape and the violence of the Civil War. Although Lincoln is not named in the poem, Lilac centers on political martyrdom, and the poem reflects much of Whitman's earlier thinking about national identity, as he had broken from traditional literary forms, experimenting in his continuing verse sequence, Leaves of Grass, from 1855 onward, with a new type of poetry to capture the energies and contradictions of American life. Early in the first section, the poet presents the three dominant images that he calls a trinity. Ever returning spring, Trinity sure to me you bring, lilac blooming, perennial and drooping star in the west, and thought of him I love. Lines 4 to 6. These images are developed and celebrated in the following sections. The powerful western fallen star in the second section, and the lilacs in the third, a sprig with its flower I break. Into this amalgam of perennial life and solitude, of birds and songs of peeping violence and endless grass, creeps, death's outlet, song of life. Passing the apple tree blows of white and pink in the orchards, carrying a corpse to where it shall rest in the grave, night and day journeys a coffin. The narrator, overwhelmed with grief, approaches the coffin with loaded arms to offer his obeisance. But by a strange paradox, his sprig of lilac memorializes not just one departing comrade and his coffin, but many. Each death remains unique, each celebrating a song of solitude, of perennial grief and joy. Quote, in the swamp, in secluded recesses, a shy and hidden bird is warbling a song, solitary the thrush. The hermit, withdrawn to himself, avoiding the settlements, sings by himself a song of the bleeding throat, death's outlet, song of life. The choice here is no longer between life and death, but between living and singing. If thou was not wanted to sing, thou wouldst surely die. Either sing or die. Thus death is quietly replaced by song, as living is livened up by singing, and death is a companion to life rather than a termination of it. With the knowledge of death as walking on one side of me and the thought of death close walking the other side of me, the narrator walks in the middle of two escorts on an endless journey. John Donne dares death and death be not proud, and Emily Dickinson uses a similar metaphysical trope in Because I Could Not Stop for Death. But Whitman goes further, making death more inclusive, embracing not only the speaker but the whole cavalcade of life in America. His knowledge of death is a sacred knowledge. As the singer so sighed to rest received me, the gray-brown bird I know received us, comrades three. So he can invite Lincoln's death as lovely and soothing, as a strong deliverance from everything else. The overwhelming question here is, how does this transcendence come into being? How does it operate? Emerson once described Whitman's poetry as a remarkable mixture of the Bhagavad Gita and the New York Herald. And that odd bonding of the scriptural and the vernacular, the transcendent and the mundane, effectively captures the essence of lilac, a work that most readers experience as a paradoxical sublimation of the magical and the commonplace, of the sublime and the prosaic. One may hear echoes of Keatsian romanticism, of the music of earth that resurrects itself like the phoenix. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? But Whitman seems to proceed further than the Keatsian celebration of spring, as Martin Griffin notes in his How Whitman Remembered Lincoln, from the unique public event with a silent sea of faces and uncared heads. He notes, three images begin to form, and these are the three images I have called before the Trinity. The declining western wall, the falling to the horizon, the songbird that brings the poem to the swamp, where the speaker must confront the destructive but also the seductive nature of death, and the lilac. Except as the speaker's friend, Lincoln remains nameless. Equally nameless are the wartime dead, as the poet blends the deaths of hundreds of thousands who died for their country into one death celebrated by thousands on its journey home. I saw battled corpses, myriads of them, and the white skeletons of young men. I saw them. I saw the debris. I saw the debris of all the slain soldiers of the war. But I saw they were not as was thought. They themselves were fully at rest. They suffered not. The living remained and suffered. The mother suffered, and the wife and the child and the musing comrade suffered, and the armies that remained suffered. The dead are in a different world. Those who read the Gita will likely see in these Whitman lines Krishna's analysis of the meaning of death to Arjuna, the warrior who thinks of himself as the cause of death. Krishna explains the meaning or meaninglessness of the war dead. That collateral deaths in a war are not only inevitable, but also necessary. In chapter 11 of the Gita, verse 31 to 34, a visibly distraught Arjuna, who has lost his equilibrium after seeing the number of war casualties around him, all victims of his arrows, seeks to understand the meaning and purpose of the absurd deaths. Krishna, with his usual intrigue, tells him that all the deaths are a part of his own cosmic scheme, all slain by him to fulfill the course of history. That Arjuna need not take the credit for killing them except as an instrument himself. Arjuna accepts his manifest destiny with humility. Whitman saw the devastation of the Civil War firsthand. In one of his journal entries he wrote, "A sight in camp in the daybreak, gray and dim, as from my tent I emerge, so early, sleepless. As slow I walk in the cool, fresh air of the path near the hospital tent. Three forms I see on stretchers lying, brought out there, untended, lying. Over each the blanket spread, ample brownish woolen blanket, gray and heavy blanket, folding, covering all. Then to the third, a face, nor child nor old, very calm, beautiful yellow, white, ivory. Young man, I think I know you. I think this face is the face of Christ himself, dead and divine and brother of all, and here he lies again. The journal entry and poem offer a glimpse into how Whitman began restructuring his poetic project after the Civil War began. Scholars have noted how distraught he was with the dead soldiers. President Lincoln insisted that construction of the Capitol's buildings proceed at full pace. So while the nation was tearing itself apart in civil war, the nation's capital was continuing to erect a unified and elegant governmental center designed by the French architect Pierre L'Enfant. It was as if the capital had become a metaphor of the nation itself, half-built, and in a struggle to determine whether it would end in fulfillment or destruction. Some of the newly constructed buildings almost immediately became hospitals, and when Whitman described the Civil War as turning the nation into a ward of casualties, America, quote, though only in her early youth, Whitman wrote, was already to hospital brought. He no doubt had in mind the way the emerging governmental center of the country was being transformed into a vast hospital. The U.S. Patent Office became a hospital in 1863, and Whitman noted the irony of the rows of sick, badly wounded, and dying soldiers surrounding the glass cases, displaying the American inventions, guns and machines, and other signs of progress. The wrecked bodies dispersed among the displays were what progress had brought, the result of new inventions that had created modern warfare. Washington was a noisy city during these years. The noise in the city was of construction. The noise just outside the city was of destruction. And the two activities conjoined in the dozens of makeshift Washington hospitals that held the shattered bodies of America's young men. Griffin tells us throughout the 1880s, Whitman delivered an annual lecture entitled Death of Abraham Lincoln on the anniversary of the assassination. In this piece, Whitman comes back to the central implication of lilac, arguing that Lincoln's death was in a certain sense, a requirement of history. In the same sense, for Whitman, the Confederate dead who fought the Civil War and gave their lives for a cause, howsoever untenable that cause might be to some, also died a necessary death. Together, their death constitutes the chorus of American life, of American history, of America's destiny. The land stretches from east to west and from north to south. For Whitman, the geography of the land goes hand in hand with its history. Lo, body and soul, this land, my own Manhattan with spires, and the sparkling and hurrying tides and rich ships, the varied and ample land, the south and the north and the light, Ohio's shores and flashing Missouri, and ever the far spreading prairies covered with grass and corn. The warble, which is taken from the previous line I quoted, how shall I warble myself for the dead one there I loved, in stanza 10, becomes one with the song of the hermit bird and the telling song of my soul, victorious song, death's outlet song. The poet leaves the president, the imperishable soul in the coffin, the lilac with heart-shaped leaves there in the dooryard, blooming, returning with spring. At the end of the poem, the three images of the lilac, the star and the bird, twined with the chant of my soul, there in the fragrant pines and the cigars, dusk and dim, bring about the resolution for grief and loss. Griffin has called it a mythic economy of sacrifice and power. One may read the poem as a passionate hymn to history. Thank you.
Questions or comments for Dr. Rath? Thank you, Sura. Appreciate it. Now, this was just supposed to be a next for you party people. You're all invited, including sons of professors. You don't have to dress up. We're going to go see a character. Just put it that way. We're going to see a character. And we need to be at 720 Wilder Place at 4:30. So I'm going to leave from the hotel at 4:15 exactly, and depending on traffic, we should get there at 15 minutes. And there's free drinks, a lot of social stuff going on. And then at exactly 5:30, we will leave, even though our host will urge you to stay. We need to leave at 5:30. And we're going to go to the Indigo Bistro at 5:45, and they have a special little section of the Indian restaurant reserved for us, and get a free dinner on behalf of the International Lincoln Center, and we'll be happy to have you there. And that should only take an hour and a half. And the nice thing about it, it doesn't look like much from the outside. It's like an office building, but inside it looks like a New York, what do you call it, New York fancy place. Unfortunately, it's very, very dark, and you may have to have headlights on your. We're going to be in the extreme left corner, and it's a quiet restaurant. That's basically why we're going there. It's just quiet so you can hear each other talk. And we have 2 tables reserved. One, I think one has 12 spots to it, the other 8, and they may need a 3rd table for us. Where you riff-raff, that table might be for you. Okay,
Wow,
so.
he's looking right.
Yeah, he was.
And then tomorrow morning, I think it starts at 8:30, and panel sessions all day long, very interesting panel sessions all day long. And you're, by the end of the day, about 5 o'clock, you're going to be pooped out, and I don't want to see you. You're going to get something to do on what you do. At lunchtime, you can eat downstairs in the little cafe downstairs, and then you're free after 5 o'clock. And then finally on Saturday, it goes from I think 8:30 again until about noon or 1 o'clock. It deals mainly with Lincoln stuff. So Sura set the Leitmotif for the rest of the program. But you all realize that Lincoln defines liberal democracy